one small thing.
Yeah.
When you bring me out, can you introduce me as Joker?
These videos are not for children. If you're a children, then piss off.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, the Infuso. And with the official announcement of a second Joker movie, with a questionable concept, I decided why not take a look back at the first one. Now, what is both loved and at times hated about this movie is just how different it is from anything else that DC has put out. Actually, come to think of it, it's very different from anything in the comic book movie genre in general. It does things more than a little bit differently. This movie doesn't have a fixation on heroes and villains. There's not a heavy emphasis put on characters that audiences are well acquainted with. Instead, most of these characters act as background players and set pieces to an all-original origin story. It's pretty much a completely new story, just with the cover of something that we all know. Now, despite this, it does borrow already established elements of the character that seem to, for the most part, gone unnoticed by general audiences. As a matter of fact, a lot of what's seen in this Joker's roots are rooted in the most famous Joker backstory, the Killing Joke. His background of being an unsuccessful comedian is plucked from these panels. His need to make others laugh with him and failure to do so leading them to laugh at him is directly inspired by this book. The Joker in this movie, like the one in the comics, is an unreliable narrator. His words are often disputed and don't line up to other accounts of his past. And in both forms of media, when we're told of the character's backstory entirely through his own perception, it's in a tragic light that paints the villain as the victim of chaotic circumstance. And when he says, it's his way of explaining that he snapped, which is a very direct reference to his speech in this very same comic.
All it takes is one bad day. That's how far the world is from where I am. Just one bad day.
He's now been reduced to lunacy. Whatever precious little sanity he was hanging on to has left him entirely. He's become what this one bad day has made him. And for me, this moment in the film is the true moment that he stops being Arthur Fleck and starts being the Joker. The movie also makes it clear that while Arthur Fleck is the name given to him by his adoptive mother, his original name and birth parents are still very much unknown. Not entirely unlike the Clown Prince of Crime from the comics. And his desire to be seen and need to go on a public talk show, only to murder that talk show's host in front of his own audience, could be taken not from the character's prologue, but rather the character's epilogue, The Dark Knight Returns. In the comic, he expresses an interest on being on the David Endocrine show, only for that appearance to end with the end of all those in attendance, David included. Not to mention the character's obvious obsession with someone who doesn't understand or care for his brand of humor, someone that he's desperate to be validated by, but instead finds that his fixation could care less about his work. I think you could definitely make a little bit of a parallel to Joker's relationship with Batman. I don't think it works exactly the same, like it's not to a T, but there is something to compare and contrast there. There is a similarity. And this is the type of dynamic that our Joker would find himself in. The whole clown movement that followed the Joker could potentially be linked to a couple of things. There are many variations of such a story in various Batman media. Following the Joker's alleged demise, a whole wide street gang forms in his honor on Batman Beyond, effectively titled The Jokers. The show Gotham had a whole cult follow their pseudo-Joker, following his passing and then resurrection. In the Arkham series, the Joker has a whole crew of clowns at his beck and call. I don't know that these are necessarily linked, but that is where my mind went. There are smaller Easter eggs throughout the movie as well, including the Murray Franklin show's font being written in the same font as Batman the Animated Series. You have a young Bruce sliding down a pole in his backyard, as a much older Bruce has been known to do. Dr. Stoner, which, by the way, sick name, dude, is the doctor who diagnosed Penny Fleck. In the comics, he's the head doctor in Arkham Asylum, and later becomes the villain Anti-Fate. This little person, Gary, could be a reference to Joker's former henchman Gaggy, but I think that could be a little bit of a stretch. Some people also seem to think that the giant rats that were mentioned a few times in the movie were a blatant reference to Ratcatcher, which, yeah, sure, I guess, but Like, to what end? This movie's gonna go out of its way to address one singular villain, and you think they're gonna waste it on Ratcatcher? I don't know. Anyway, my point is that there's definitely some love shown to the original source material. This movie does have some semblance of sense of the original property, but it's instead choosing to do something original with it. What I love about this movie is that it's not the traditional comic book movie. It's a movie made based on a comic book character, but that's kinda where it begins and ends. It provides a much more cinematic experience that takes an already established character and does something new with it. Look, as a comic book fan, I'm really grateful that there have been plenty of adaptations of beloved stories over the last 14 years. But I think in addition to retelling stories that have already been told, new creators need to be handed the rights to these characters to tell new stories. Stories that defy expectations, stories that take these characters in different directions than we're used to. I know that this is blasphemy to a lot. Hell, it was for me for a long time too, until I realized that that's what storytelling is. Comic book creators have been given the reins to do as they please with these beloved characters in separate canons. And the results have been mixed, to say the least. But some of these separate new interpretations have been pretty iconic in their own right. I think we should afford movie makers that same privilege, to tell different stories. Yes, this Joker isn't the one we're used to. It's not entirely the character from the comics, but does it really have to be? For me, this Joker survives as its own valid version of the character. It's not the traditional performance that we're used to, but maybe that's for the better, 'cause we're kinda getting used to it. This Joker movie manages to be a good DC film, despite not being tied into a larger continuity, not bending to the will of nostalgia, not caving to the memories of its demographics. The Joker movie uses familiar faces to create an environment that we're a stranger to. It's been stated before by a movie reviewer who very much despised the movie, that this movie wears its influences on its sleeve. And I'm not disputing that because yeah, it does. But I also don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with that. The two movies this movie clearly takes inspiration from are The King of Comedy and Taxi Driver, two Robert De Niro-led, Martin Scorsese-directed movies, both of whom had some involvement in the making of this Joker movie. Martin Scorsese was actually originally going to direct the film, and Robert De Niro is attached to the movie in a main cast role. Yeah, it's obvious where this movie pulled some of its core concepts from. A delusional comedian in a red suit becoming obsessed with a talk show personality is pretty much the entire premise of The King of Comedy. But when the film and its creators are readily admitting to what the blueprint for this movie was, while building an all-new story off of it that differs from the original, where's the problem? There's a school of thought that there are only 7 stories to tell, the 7 basic plots. And with that limited number of possibilities, there are of course going to be creative works that intercept in some way, shape, or form. Projects will have familiar sets, scenes, and story pieces. One thing will be reminiscent of something you've previously seen before. Whether that be through design or coincidence, it's inevitable. So why is this such an issue? It's not only well aware of the comparison to be made, but it's actively paying tribute to its predecessor all throughout. On top of that, The King of Comedy, for as good as it is, isn't exactly well remembered or relevant in the late 2010s, early 2020s. So instead of somebody coming along and creating a less than stellar remake, is it not better to instead adapt portions of it that worked to fit a new narrative? I don't know, it makes sense to me. I've heard a couple people complain about the age difference between Bruce and Arthur in this movie. Statements that basically go along the lines of, how is this kid gonna grow up to become Batman when the Joker's already pushing 40? He'll be an old-ass man by the time Bruce becomes Batman. I've also heard different explanations for this, one of which being that this isn't the real Joker, this is the guy who would go on to inspire the Joker. Which really isn't all that great of an idea if you ask me. The idea of making the Joker an unoriginal copycat and a mindless follower in the footsteps of someone else's madness completely devalues the character and the very concept of such a character. I think the best explanation is the most simple one, and that's, point blank, this isn't that kind of movie. If the Joker movie became a trilogy in which we never saw a Batman, I really wouldn't be upset. As a matter of fact, I think I'd be at ease. This is fine. Bruce, his parents, Alfred, they're all here, they all exist, but Batman doesn't necessarily have to be a thing. This is a separate continuity from anything else that's come before it, and more than likely anything that will come after it. This doesn't need to involve the Dark Knight. This could just be a different take on the overall mythos. Personally, I think if you're watching the Joker movie wondering when Batman will show up, you may be missing the point. This isn't the beginning of some decade-long build. We're not on our way to a Batman vs. Joker story. As the title implies, this is just a Joker story. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. As much as I love Batman, I don't really think he's needed in this telling of the tale. This movie does a lot of good. The soundtrack and the cinematography are both great and really help set the mood and complement the scenes. The story itself is mostly well told, and does a good job of getting us to understand and maybe even sympathize at times with the struggling Arthur. And it does so without ever making him the hero of the story. I mean, sure, ultimately he's another victim, but he's never righteous. This movie isn't trying to personify him as a greater-than-good, misunderstood hero. He's just a sad madman who is driven to his breaking point by a society who could care less about him. He's laughed at when he's pushed around or degraded by the world around him, but then condemned when he finally fights back. He's a fish out of water even when he's in a full tank of a school of fish. The guy is an earthborn alien. Now, what I will say about this movie is that sometimes it isn't as subtle as it maybe should be. Sometimes it's directly on the clown nose.
Sorry.
It does kind of fall into that artsy-fartsy territory for me from time to time. And overall, I think the movie thinks it has a lot more to say than it actually does. But despite that, I think it's a very good, fleshed-out cinematic experience. This is a comic book movie in name only. I feel like, unlike a lot of modern-day comic book movies, this feels more like, well, a film. There's more substance and heart and, I don't know, overall meaning to this. This isn't some 2-hour commercial to set up 6 other movies, which undoubtedly will only exist in an effort to set up 36 other movies. I really like this movie, and I wouldn't mind seeing the rest of the DC characters in separate standalone interpretations like this. And I know there's a lot of confusion surrounding a sequel, a movie that's allegedly going to be a musical starring Lady Gaga, which I can't quite figure out if it's a troll from Todd Phillips or a fact about this piece of fiction. Nonetheless, I think it's a perfectly absurd idea, and I think it has the capability of succeeding in the face of logic. Look, I didn't think a serious telling of this tale from the guy who made The Hangover would be any good, and then I ended up really loving it. So I'm going into this with that open mind, thinking that anything's possible. In my eyes, he's earned his right to be weird and tell his own bizarre story. Let the guy have his fun, and hopefully we'll all have ours watching him. With that being said, I was your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso, and if you like this video and want to see more Batman-related content, leave me a comment saying,
How about another joke, Murray?
thanks for watching. Hope to see you in the next one. Oh, and before you go, I wanted to ask, have you ever loved one of my videos but couldn't find it because the copyright overlords have struck it down and smited me? Have you ever wanted to watch some of my many deleted videos again? Have you ever wanted me to review something specific? Like, we're talking a whole ass review at your own request. Have you ever wanted early access to my content weeks or even at times months before it comes out on the channel? Well, if the answer to all above is yes, you're in luck. All of these things are a possibility with the relaunch of my Patreon, so feel free to check it out and sign up for all the rewards I mentioned and all the ones I didn't. Link in the description below.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time, same bat channel.